Hello, everybody. Welcome. I was listening to a podcast by Chris Williamson, and I cannot recall the name of his guest. They were talking about primarily problems with men working with or not just sort of ignoring their emotions. Or emotional, defection, and how when people get uncomfortable today, it's very common that they just turn to their phone and swipe around a bit as if they're blurring the eyes with which they view their own interiority. And a lot of this orbits shame. And all of this makes clear sense to me, everything they were saying. And Chris was talking about something he had learned, which was to set aside the urge to make something land with an audience. And the capacity to speak very eloquently, which are both things he does well and practices regularly. And they have, fairly good payoffs in terms of the range of behaviors we could engage in. Not bad. You get some social cachet and attention and stuff. And these days that can be really profound. But it can also be isolating. Most wings have two birds. I'm not going to try to explain. I think your subconscious will understand what I said. And obviously I do some of that. And if you listen to some of my older recordings, you'll see that I'm a lot sharper, mostly, and sometimes very sharp. Occasionally I get a little bit of attenuation in my intellect and its perspectives these days. And produce, something that I'm more or less pleased with as a creator, as a content creator, which is kind of an artist in a way. It's funny. There's a log on this trail, and the part that faces the trail is maybe 4 feet in breadth or width and 2 feet across, and it has two semicircular-ish cuts, right? And every time peripherally that I walk past this log, it looks to my peripheral intelligence like a woman is in a kind of a robe or a shawl is sitting there. And it's weird because it happens to me almost every day. So my peripheral, this is so important. All right. So I was listening to Chris, and he was talking about being clumsy, being willing, like when he's with a therapist, to take off the stop dancing on stage, right? To get little rewards from the, visiting authority. To speak haltingly, to half-finished sentences, to abandon declarations that he doesn't truly have faith in mid-sentence, and so forth. So that actual exploration can occur instead of game playing. And, the arts of therapeutic awareness are rich, deep, and ancient. It's almost hard to go wrong, in a sense, because unless your therapist is really bad, or they're like checked out, right, which is possible, but unless they're really checked out, it's likely to go well for the simple reason that even if you're relatively skillfully introspective, it's really easy for someone outside you to see features of the situation from angles you have never inhabited perspectively or purposively, right? What people would call agented, in an agented way. I'm not sure I love that language, but sometimes I don't mind it, and there's places where it's useful. And so you can see that what I'm already doing here is kind of taking myself apart. In the sense of inhibiting most of my usual game. Although, I'm capable of grandstanding and sort of one-manning the show or so forth. And sometimes that goes really well, but also sometimes my heart's not really in it yet. And I can still stumble through the presentation, but I'm not happy. I mean, what am I doing here anyway? As I've mentioned, in a sense, I'm trying to work features of my thought, speech, and linguistic activity, my vocabulary, my memory, my perception, perspective, my perspectival skills. I'm trying to work them so they don't disappear. Right? And that may sound tragic or whatever, and I don't expect others to be thrilled. Though sometimes I hope they might get a little gem or two that they themselves can make wise use of, or really is helpful in some way, or helps them to understand feelings or thoughts they've had, or even fundamental concerns like why are humans mean? Why is there badness in the world? Why is there injustice? Why is there harm and wrongdoing? All these things. And some of the grave curiosities too. What is light? What is intelligence? How can we think about these matters in new ways together for useful purposes or exciting, memory, anamnesis, or discoveries, right? Recognitions of perhaps stuff that sits far beyond representational thought's ordinary purviews. There I go, being articulate. My articulate guy got spun up. In transactional analysis, which is a very useful framework to explore, I'm not sure. I tend to not get really committed in a cult-like way to any specific framework, but lots of them have really important toys and tools to play with. And in transactional analysis, there's a sort of persona segment, if you will, called the little professor. And it must be really embarrassing for people who are aware of this to observe me in my in my babblings, my daytime, what do they call those things in Australia? A wander, right? Because they can see. What I can also see, which is a lot of the time, quote, I'm dancing as fast as I can, unquote, which is a sign that something fundamental has gone sideways, right? Otherwise, we dance so much more naturally. This afternoon I was doing Tai Chi, which I often do in the botanical gardens, and practicing Tai Chi. And there's a couple of young, probably adolescent-ish ravens. And they're huge because the adolescents are giant. They're like 1.5 times the size of the adults or something more. And the male is particularly fond of me. He'll walk over and fluff up. And he's gotten to know me not because I'm Mr. Magic Birdman, but because I gave them peanuts. Really good peanuts, too. So they know me, and they'll come over and hang out. Although these days usually it's just the male. And he'll fluff up like he does when his parents are doing a flyby and just hang out. And I'll do Tai Chi and occasionally throw him a peanut. Now, what ended up happening today, look, one of the reasons, in a way, I am a little bit on stage when I'm doing that. People come to San Francisco for local color, and I'm happy to fill that role a little bit once in a while. But I'm really there to practice Tai Chi and also to see the people and the place and the sky and so forth. Yeah. So today I was practicing, and the young male was very close to me, probably within like 2.5 feet. And people were looking at the situation, and it probably looked really magical. Right? Here's this guy engaged in a behavior that looks kind of magical by itself, and now there's this bird just hanging out right there with him, right? And many people probably haven't even seen ravens. So the big, purple-black adolescent raven is quite a sight to see. So I'm like hanging out doing Tai Chi, and the raven's puffing up and sort of dancing around a little bit with me. And people are, getting out their cameras and stuff. Not too many. It's like a couple of couplets, maybe 3 over the span. And I realized, which is such a funny thing to say, because the structure of the phrase has a kind of possibly schizophrenic onomatopoeia, if I've got those two things right, because it to realize it is as if one is seeing with actual eyes, which are not merely the physical ones and not merely the ones we normally employ, not necessarily to see something, but to to see something from outside, yeah? To see the features that are invisible to us if we are inside it. There are many sorts of different kinds of eyes we can have inside ourselves. And although it sounds metaphoric, it's also, there are certain kinds of hands we can have inside ourselves, certain kinds of noses and ears, ways of hearing, ways of sensing flavors of things. And of course, all of this language is figurative, but it's very useful because it helps us to realize that there's other ways of seeing, and thus also other ways of being near at hand if we should simply observe our biases and predilections and historical constructs, topologies of emotion that we are usually, if we are not paying very close attention, we are either trapped in, or we're having such a good time that we don't have to look there, or we're having such a bad time that we want to defect further into whatever it is. There's all kinds of ways. You can defect into math if you really want to. You can defect into computer science or any discipline, but you can also defect into isolation and the various painful addictions that humans are subject to when they are hurting inside. Many of which I have had experience with.
See if I can get it going up here.
As human beings, we are inclined to role formation, role inaction, role fulfillment, and role interference. And there's something else I wanted to mention that came up in the podcast I was listening to, and I think it was Chris who said something dangerously insightful and kind of undesirable that I heard, which was language is a way of not getting things done. Now, of course, there is this kind of I talk a lot, but what do I do thing. There's a way in which people who are very artful in conversation may be displacing their agency so that they don't actually accomplish things. And one of the kinds of therapy they were talking about was I can't remember what it's actually called, and it's something very simple. Like intensive something like intensive activity therapy, but the basic idea is just to get men doing things with their bodies. And I've been aware of this principle because it doesn't, I mean, good luck employing talk therapy with someone who's actually schizophrenic. It's not impossible, it's very unlikely to be effective. They already have enough talking kind of going on, and maybe more than enough. So if you can get them engaging in activities at which have a beginning, middle, and an end, and there's a sort of conclusion, and at the conclusion there's some benefit, and most, lots and lots. There's vast myriads of activities like this, right? Or if you just move your body, do something with your body, clean the kitchen, whatever, go for a walk. And it doesn't have to be about like I'm active or I'm slovenly or I'm languishing. Rather, it's just the experience of having activity that engages you physically, and the body seems to work through some of its emotional backlog that way. And of course, there's a spectrum of this where it becomes very extreme, and people, for example, may be constantly cleaning. But that made sense. And the thing that was said about, like as a writer, okay, which I am, I call myself this, here's a role, right, that I conceived. It has a beginning, a middle, and end. You begin to write, you work on it, you finish it, so forth. But as a writer, it's kind of a scary thing to hear, because I do spend some of my creativity, so to speak, I do invest some of my creativity in both my recordings and also conversations with friends. And some of them are more comedic, and some of them are more intellectual, and some of them are more philosophical, and most of them have all three components. And sometimes, if we're close, there'll be a little bit of what you might call nudging each other, poking each other, playful, I don't know, playful disparagement or highlighting of flaws, and sometimes playful self-disparagement too.
He's not successful, and his peers also acknowledge that he's
So I was doing Tai Chi, and the people were watching, and I realized they don't know. They think something probably magical is going on. And I'm not claiming nothing magical is going on. But I'm also not claiming that I'm the great, raven attracting magician. Though I don't mind playing Birdman of San Francisco occasionally. Lots of birds around here know me. But I'm very, it seems very unlikely that they would know me if I had not brought them food and played with them a bit with the food. Food is a kind of an offering, but it's also much more, much more efficaciously, it structures nervous systems. Yeah? In previous recordings, I've talked about situations where I was creating danger by bringing something that animals couldn't reasonably say no to. Right? And you see this problem with humans all the time in our representational cultures. And today, when the young raven was with me, and I don't know how smart he is about the predators yet, it's not clear that he recognizes them. And I think he's also somewhat bemused when we are together, because he's all fluffed up, right? And he's not all fluffed up by accident. Something's going on. It's making him fluffy. Right? So I saw a young hawk. Well, I don't know if it was young. I saw what looked like a small red tail, scope him and come to a nearby perch. And it was not at all clear to me that he was aware of that. And I'm not claiming my perspective was pristine. But my sense was, this young bird is in danger right now. That hawk realizes that teenage ravens, while, a plausibly difficult prey item, make a good meal, can be captured and so forth. The only thing that comforts me in hindsight is that the hawk probably prefers to strike from altitude at prey rather than just sort of swoop in from a nearby tree, at not high speed, and then grapple with a raven who's got a very sharp tearing beak. I suspect that if hawks take teenager full-grown ravens or as food, they'd probably try to strike them at high velocity and shock them, knock the wind out of them, and then see what can be done, would be my guess. But I was aware that showing off puts people in danger under certain circumstances. And perhaps that's part of a story that I have in my mind that I take seriously. Perhaps, as is probably obvious, I've always been a bit... Like when I was a little child, one of the things I really wanted to be was a singer. And what does that mean? Does it mean that I want to sing, or I want to be seen as one who sings? Or is it both? Is it more? And obviously it's more. But I do seem to have some kind of an affinity, a natural inclination to seek an expressive position, right? I want to shine, create, play, especially with others, which is something I miss a lot. It used to happen pretty frequently when I first came to the city. So I have that inclination generally. And it's also nice to be seen. I think us humans are a uniquely... It may not be that unique. It could be very common among all animals who are social together, but we really benefit from positive observation. And many of us may not get much of that in our daily lives. And so that's part of what's going on with me as well. I'm getting a little bit of that human sunlight, right? When I was in the Central Valley, I could go for very long walks, 10 miles or something, and really not see a single human face. And when I walk here, there are many faces. Not all of them want contact, and I don't always want contact. But that sunlight the sunlight of positive human attention, or at least, something like the negative attention is missing, is very refreshing and restorative.
Probably ought to get another pair of these. I like them so much. It's not really the same one every day.
When humans talk about shoes, they're talking about something really fundamental, right? You want to know something about someone, look at their shoe collection. You will learn a lot. I'm not even going to go into the shoe hoarding behavior and the fact, I'm not going to say I'm not going to say anything about the things I'm actually going to say. Yeah, the shoe hoarding, I can't throw those away. Those are part of my body, right? Yeah, humans and shoes, my goodness. A friend of mine has recently begun collecting sea glass, right? Glass modified by the ocean. And I realized when she told me this, eventually, that there was going to be like an elaborate subculture and, grading and trading and an economy and all kinds of hullabaloo. Which, of course, there is. Once the humans begin the process of commodifying an object, then there tends to grow around that commodification a subculture, such as with tools, guns, cars, jewelry, shoes, clothing, music, film, the internet, social media. All of these little subcultures spring up. It's almost as if the universe designed an animal specifically just to represent things to death. Extinguish them via representation, right? I can just see Homo sapiens epitaph on their grave. We took so many pictures of food that there wasn't any left. There's a guy with 1 million pictures of his girlfriend and no actual girlfriend. Or no relationship, no meaningful relationship with the woman he's taking photographs of. And there's something like that happens inside us with our own, This is what I meant when I was talking about the role thing. In the absence of a context where many noble and profound roles await our joining them, what we get is every kind of counterfeit of this. So, I understand lots of things that I don't usually say. When I'm saying things, I'm probably primarily
does have some
I'm playing in the ballpark of language. My son called me up and was complaining about some declaration or other. And I said, yeah, it's not surprising to hear you say this, because we both know that the moment I start making face noises in English, I'm lying through my teeth by default. The whole representational communication thing, while useful in certain branches of the pie chart, is exactly the opposite of what's required for the vast majority of the pie that actually matters. That language stuff is probably mostly for negotiating representational contexts. There's some kind of weird, I think primarily masculine thing that I've experienced more lately while walking, which is that joggers jog right into my personal space as if on purpose, as if it's an intentional jab or, which I think is kind of weird and sort of makes me wonder if I might have accidentally become invisible. Yeah, sometimes. I was walking and there was a girl walking behind me earlier who was right up in my physical space behind me. I mean, she was, 3 inches behind me or something. And it's very peculiar. Maybe I have become invisible. I mean, it could be a benefit. William S. Burroughs used to talk about this quite frequently, the capacity to be invisible. He seemed to think that it depended primarily on who sees who first. If you see them first, you can fade into the background. If they see you first, it's going to be harder. Something like that. One imagines a beautiful science fiction story where a human being develops such a profound sensitivity to an ability to not be seen, right? That they become functionally invisible and can then move about among the humans undetected. I mean, what could you do if you were undetected by the humans? Of course, was it Ralph Ellis that wrote The Invisible Man? We've had many science fiction stories of this kind of thing. Right? What would you do if either A, you were invisible, or B, you could halt time for others, right, while still moving about freely yourself? So that everything would around you, you could just sort of snap your fingers and it would freeze. Those things are possibly, both of those things could well be achievable by humans, even conceivably in the physical layer, but certainly in the non-physical layer. I think we're vastly more aware of observation. I think a lot of the people who have been brave enough to reach out and talk with me, I know from experience that many of them felt quite intimidated and thought, this guy's critical intelligence is going to size me up and rip me to shreds. Nothing like who I am. If we're being super intellectual together, we may get very critically, we may spin up our critical intelligences together, but I'm a softie. I'm like a lovey, let's play, let's goof around, let's have fun, let's see new things sort of person. So. And I'm sure that in my blind ignorance and youthful hubris, I hurt many people's feelings. Perhaps some of the people I loved most, with a moment of critical indiscretion, right? And it's really easy if you're not someone to see through the charade. The difficulty is in seeing through one's own and then being gentle and kind with the results. I'm so grateful for this chance, this day, this moment, to reflect and learn and grow together in this ever stranger adventure we call life. May it treat you and your loved ones gently, kindly, curiously, and as if you were in fact its own children. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to more adventures in the future. Bye-bye for now.